Why did you cut off? I did not cut off. Chilling words from the flight deck of the doomed Air India 787 that crashed, killing all but one of the 242 people on board and another 19 on the ground so far. We're going to go over the prelim report on this episode of Taking Off. Hi, I'm Dan Milliken, and I'm on the road. But the prelim report on Air India Flight 171, a Boeing 787, is out, and it paints a startling picture of the final moments of that doomed flight. June 12th, 2025, Ahmedabad, India. A very experienced 56-year-old captain with over 15,000 hours of flight experience and a 32-year-old first officer with 3,400 hours have gotten good rest the night before after both coming in from Mumbai. The two have decided that for this flight, Air India 171, the first officer would be the pilot flying and the captain would be the pilot monitoring for this leg. It's pretty standard flight crew operations to take turns. But the captain would always be the pilot in command. The Boeing 787 arrived on the previous flight just after 11 a.m. local. The Boeing 787 is a large jet made for long-haul trips, and as of this day, there had never been a hull loss crash of a 787. Just before noon, the captain and the first officer arrived at the airport and took breathalyzer tests, both found fit to operate. At 12:35 p.m., the pilots arrive at the gate. The airplane has been loaded with 54,200 kilograms of fuel. That's almost 120,000 pounds or 60 tons. Takeoff weight was calculated at 470,000 pounds, under the 481,000 pound limit. The weather was good but warm with a light westerly wind. They would be taking runway 23 with the west wind. The flight crew did all their checks, and all 230 passengers, 10 crew people, 2 pilots boarded. Everything looked good. On the flight deck, they did their takeoff calculations. With the weight and the conditions, V1, which is the takeoff decision speed, was determined to be 153 knots. This was the speed at which they were committed to fly and could no longer reject the takeoff in case something was wrong. Rotational speed, or VR, was set for 155 knots. V2, or takeoff safety speed, 162 knots. Each takeoff on every airliner, these speeds are calculated during pre-flight because they vary depending on the weight, the weather, the conditions. With the pre-flight planning done, now just after 1 p.m. local, they were ready to begin their flight to London Gatwick. At 1:18, they pulled away from the gate. They start the extremely powerful GEnx 1B70 engines. There's 2, left and right, and they taxi to runway 23 via Romeo 4, which only gets them about halfway. They receive clearance to back taxi on the runway for the rest of the way down the 11,499 foot runway. At 1:37 and 33 seconds, tower clears them for takeoff, and within 4 seconds, they are rolling. "56 seconds into the takeoff roll, they reach V1. No rejected takeoff now. 2 seconds later, rotation speed. The engines are humming along just fine. And 4 seconds after that, at 1:38 and 39 seconds, the airplane leaves the ground. Everything is still good. 3 seconds later, the airplane reaches 180 knots. The last 3 seconds of normal. It was at this point that the left engine fuel cutoff switch clicks from run to cutoff. Then 1 second later, the right engine fuel cutoff. Click, click. That big fan that you see spinning in the front part of the jet engine is the low pressure compressor, and the speed it turns at is called N1. Behind it is the high pressure compressor, rotational speed labeled N2. The N2 shaft drives the accessory gearbox, which generates electrical power for the plane. It's at this point, at 1:38 and 42 seconds, N1 and N2 begins to decrease as their fuel is shut off. In the prelim report, this is when they mention an unspecified pilot says, "Why did you cut off?" And the other responding, "I did not do so." The report doesn't give a timestamp for this dialogue, so it's unclear how soon after the fuel cutoff switches had been identified as the problem. Both N2 speeds dropped below minimum to generate electrical power, and the ram air turbine, or RAT, was automatically deployed and started supplying hydraulic power at 1:38:47, 5 seconds after the fuel had been cut off. Now, 10 seconds since the fuel was cut off, the engine 1 switch was flicked back to the run position. 2 seconds after that, the APU began startup consistent with the auto start logic. 4 seconds after the switch for engine 1 was put back to run, the switch for engine 2 was put back to run. And when fuel control switches are moved from cutoff to run while the aircraft is in flight, each engine's full authority dual engine control FADEC automatically manages a relight and thrust recovery sequence of ignition and fuel introduction. And by the way, for those who prefer the acronym EEC for the 787 over FADEC, I get it, but the prelim report calls it FADEC. Now, the airplane is extremely low and getting slower. The engines are in the process of relighting now that the fuel is being sent back into them. The switch thrown for engine 2 was done with 15 seconds left before impact. Engine 1's core deceleration stops and begins reversing. Engine 2 is having trouble. It can't stop the deceleration even though it did relight. The computer attempts to reintroduce fuel to try and increase acceleration, but there's just not time. It's now 1:39:05 seconds, 6 seconds before the impact. A pilot radios, "Mayday, mayday, mayday." At 1:39:11 seconds, the flight data recorder stops. The too short of a flight is over. From takeoff, the flight was 32 seconds long. This report also clears up that one or both of the pilots tried to save the plane, tried to restart the engines, and if they could have gotten even one engine back up to full thrust, they would have been able to climb out of it. But it takes time to get the engines relit, time to get them spooled back up, time to get the thrust back up, time they didn't have. The aircraft first struck trees and a tall chimney at about an 8-degree pitch up, wings level attitude, before impacting the BJ Medical College Hostel, which is 0.9 nautical miles from the departure end of runway 23. The wreckage was found primarily in a 1,000 by 400 foot path among the buildings of the hostel. With this report, we now know how the plane crashed. What we don't know is why. Mechanical failure of the fuel cutoff switches is pretty much ruled out in this report by the statement on the last page. At this stage of investigation, there are no recommended actions to the B787-8 and or the GE NX-1B engine operators and manufacturers. If it had been a mechanical issue, the switches migrating due to a faulty locking mechanism or something else, then you would see directives going out to check or repair those switches on all the existing aircraft. But this report does not do that. With them ruling out at this stage mechanical, then it turns to human. And this report does not give any clues as to the accidental versus intentional, which is what everybody's going to be asking. So I'm not going to speculate on that. And what I mean by accidental is that the pilot's hands stay on the throttles, and maybe the jostling of the flight deck experienced during takeoff. And when they remove their hand, maybe they clip the two switches. I mean, you have the locking mechanism there, but who knows? We'll see if we get an answer to that when the subsequent reports come out. This report does clear up some questions. The plane's landing gear was always down and locked. It was never just dangling. The RAT was deployed. The APU had auto-started. The flaps were in the correct setting for takeoff. There were no bird strikes. The fuel was tested and was fine. The plane was not overweight. And some questions we now have as a result of this report. Was there anyone in the jump seat on the flight deck? It's unlikely, because I would think they would mention that in this report. Or maybe not. And the biggest question, how did the fuel switches get placed into the cutoff position? In the U.S., an investigation like this one might take a year or more. And I'm not sure how fast the Indian authorities will move. And finally, one thing this report does not address in any way is the one passenger who survived. And I hope in subsequent reports they try to answer the question of how. How could one person walk away from this crash when 241 others did not? Is there something that we can learn from that? And really, that's what I'll be looking for. What can we take away from this horrible tragedy that can make us better people and better pilots? And I also want to mention, in this report, they point to a Special Airworthiness Information Bulletin, an AAIB, that was issued on December 17th, 2018, 7 years back, that some 737 operators reported that the locking mechanism on the fuel cutoff switches had been installed without the locking mechanism disengaged. It's the same switches that they used in the 787. It was not considered an unsafe situation and did not have a mandatory airworthiness directive, or AD. And the suggestive actions from the SAIB were not carried out by Air India for this 787. That's our report, and I want to thank our sponsors that help make these reports possible, like 67 Designs, incredible mounts for your phones, tablets, and cameras in the car, boat, or plane. I'm traveling and using one now. Check them out at 67d.com. They're made in the U.S., bringing manufacturing and jobs to the U.S. And if you found this report useful, check out our other report here on the screen. Thanks again, and remember, superior judgment trumps superior skills. Take care.